Well, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, nō mai haere mai. Welcome to this session on the media. And as a washed-up B- celebrity, I'm extremely grateful for you to come here in preference to the political titans who are downstairs. Oh, you don't know? You're in the... Okay. See, and this is... I wish. Look, thank you so much for coming, and I think that Damien has actually set the tone here. I would like it to be a conversation in and around the room. We'll probably talk for about 15 minutes between ourselves and then punt it to you. And
I've got an hour speech right here.
Oh, you've got an hour speech?
Yeah. No.
Just wing it. You can do it. Allow me to introduce my fellow panelists. To my right is, and I think comfortable in that position, is Peter Williams. Peter is an icon. I first encountered him at TVNZ, and as I was tremulously approaching a sort of fill-in position, or just like a holiday thing for breakfast, he said, how do you think you'll go? And I said, I think it'll be exciting. And there was this dramatic, abyss-like pause, and he said, what if you blow chunks? That question has echoed down throughout my life. But Peter is an icon, TV, radio, print, newsreader, host. He was TV Guide Readers voted Best Newsreader 2 years running. New Zealand Rugby Union Supreme Media Awards. He is now a host at Reality Check Radio, and I am looking forward to his view as to what's happening in the media currently in regards to free speech. Uncomfortably to my left is Damien Grant. And Damien is he's the writer in stuff that provokes a lot of throat clearing. I don't know if you've read the introduction, but he writes, and I quote from the website, quote, from a libertarian perspective, i.e. don't blame us. But I relish Damien's often blistering clarity and his sense of humour, which he has already shown today. He is a family man, an insolvency consultant, a fan of ideas. He's done some hard yards, including a bit of jail time in his 20s, so we have something in common. I'm not joking. And I would like to hope that he's the man who persuaded stuff to get rid of those awful emojis at the bottom of stories. How did this story make you feel? I don't care. I want to know what thoughts it provoked, but that's another matter. My name is Tim Wilson. I'm Executive Director at Maxim Institute. We're a public policy research and analysis think tank. We try and help leaders make wise decisions. We do this through research, public engagement, and an internship for young people. That's actually starting again on Sunday. I'm here because I've been in the media a bit, TV, radio, and I'm possibly one of the few people who has been published in the New York Times and Women's Day. So.
And you're a novelist as well, aren't you?
Oh yeah, and I wrote 2 novels of satire on TV news. That's right. News Pigs and the Straight Banana. Please buy them at once. The numbers are just mouldering. Look, enough joshing. We'll kick it off. I want to know. I'm going to ask you. Actually, no. I'm going to ask Damien. Then Peter can react. I think Peter likes responding. New Zealand media, is it free? If so, how free? Your view.
In reference to the disclaimer, to be fair, they did the same thing to Verity Johnson.
Okay.
She also gets to say, not from a libertarian perspective. So it's not just me that stuff does that.
Provokes throat clearing. Okay.
2, maybe Verity needs it as well. Free in the sense of it costs no money, or free as it is untrammeled by the state?
Free in the sense that you can say exactly what you believe.
No, I write for stuff, and no, I can't say exactly what I believe because that is true of everybody who writes for a news organisation. That will be true of Matthew Hooton. That will be true of anybody who works for an organisation. When you write for an organisation, you need to respect the parameters of that organisation. And so there may well be things that I want to say that stuff would be uncomfortable publishing, and that will be true of every columnist from Matthew Hooton to Verity Johnson onwards. But it is free in the sense that if you have a view that is unpalatable, that is outside the mainstream, there you will have the ability to find it published. So there are organisations like Reality Check Radio and the Spin-Off and the Daily Blog where those voices can find an outfit, and there is, whilst it might be hard to get amplification, those views are not restricted. So I think it is free, yes.
Okay. Peter?
It's free, but because the big corporate media, the outlets that have the biggest audiences, and we're talking about nzherald.co.nz, Stuff, RNZ, TV NZ, they do not like opinions that differ wildly from the narrative. There are numerous other far smaller media organisations where, yes, there can be a wide divergence of opinion and some really well-written and well-reasoned material. NZCPR, Muriel Newman's website. The Platform is an online radio station. You mentioned Reality Check Radio a little bit. There is Bassett, Brash and Hyde. So there are plenty of, shall we say, right-leaning, small alternative media outlets. And that's not to mention all the Substacks that are written by people with right-leaning opinions, and I've got one myself. But I get the statistics from Substack about the number of people that read my stuff, and if I have a really, really good post, a really popular post, I get 2,400 readers. That sometimes is picked up by NZCPR and by Bassett, Brash and Hyde. Now, I think the stuff is pretty good, and it should be published in the Herald or on the Stuff or whatever, and there would be, hundreds of thousands of readers. So the opportunity to express opinions outside what I think is a very left-leaning media narrative in this country, yes, the opportunities are there, but there aren't many consumers for them.
Can I counter your view with two things? One is those large, so for example, TVNZ, those larger media organisations. I would say NZME is pretty stable. I don't know how Stuff makes a living, but that's another story. TVNZ is under pressure. Free-to-air broadcast TV is collapsing. Just some stats from the US election. Obviously, the US is ahead of the curve, but viewership on free-to-air broadcast TV was 1/4 down of the election coverage on the 2020 election. So that audience dropped by 1/4. The number of households who actually watched the US election was at a level of 26.5 million, which is it was equivalent to 1960. So it's the lowest level in almost 65 years. So I would say that those some of those larger organisations are collapsing, and there's a fragmentation going on, which you're describing.
Yes, they've got much smaller audiences than what they used to have. I mean, in the days,
but they're still significant.
But they are still significant, and the population's grown as well. So in days gone by, you would get for an All Blacks match or for a really big news night on TV1, you would get 1 million viewers when there was only 3 million people living in the country. I doubt that TV1, even with 5.2, 5.3 million of a population, I doubt that TV1 News gets anywhere near 1 million viewers anymore, even for a monstrous night like, say, an election. So if they get, but they're still getting 600,000-700,000,
yes,
which is still a huge audience compared to the other alternative startups.
Can I just ask, in your view, in terms of the opinion, how significant is it, do you think, opinion actually is? Because when I look at the media, I tend to think that the people reporting the news have a bit more influence than commentators like ourselves
we throw stuff out there, but I'm not too sure that that moves the dial as much as, say, a journalist hunting down a scoop.
Yeah, but what you're finding particularly, I think, in TV1 a lot of the time and stuff, is that their news reporting comes from a predetermined angle, doesn't it?
Yeah,
and
that's what I was saying.
And the classic case of that was that, well, I think the reporting style was called hysterical even by the Prime Minister when Mikey Sherman got very excited about a poll early on which showed that the opposition parties may have more supporters than the coalition government. And her reporting of that was, I mean, I didn't see it on the night because I try to avoid TV1. I like to maintain my blood pressure at a reasonable level, but because there was such an outcry, I made a point of looking at what the fuss was about. And my God, I'm thinking, I go back to TV1 political editors like Fred Cockram back in the 1970s and the late John Bishop. Would they have ever reported a political poll like that? No way, Jose. I mean, that was just an extraordinary piece of reportage, which was dreadfully biased. It attracted something like
It was opinion.
It was totally opinion. 300 and something complaints, all of which were just summarily brushed away as if nothing had happened.
But do you think that, because one thing I'd be quite interested in is, so we've seen the election results in the United States, where the media there, not quite as polarised as what we have here, but certainly most of the media, from perception here, is quite left-leaning. The majority of the population...
I would submit they're more polarised in a good way, so you at least have a spectrum, whereas over here I think you would long for conservative voices in the media spectrum. It inclines more to the left.
I want to come back to that because
Sure.
it's an interesting point. But my question would be, if you have a look at the United States, they have a predominantly left-leaning media, and yet the electorate kind of did their own thing anyway. So
yeah, but what's the top-rating news network in the States? This is the fascinating thing. I heard
Fox. Is that Fox?
Fox, yeah, Fox
It is
News,
Fox,
yeah, which
okay.
is the
Fox won
right-leaning network. Yeah.
Fox won the election
Yeah.
coverage, but interestingly, MSNBC, which leans to the left, came at quite. I think it was like 1 million shy. So Fox got something like 5.1. MSNBC. CNN's the one with the problem. So
Well,
yeah.
CNN's had
those
problems
are
for
tiny.
years.
5 million out of a population
Yeah.
of 300.
Well, that's the staggering thing. Tim mentioned 26 million people watched election night coverage. I heard Hosking say it was 35 million. It doesn't
26
matter.
million households.
Yeah. Okay. But either way, what is that about? A 15 rating? 15% of the population watched the election.
Well-
What was the rest of the country doing? At the pub or something? Watching football?
Absolutely. Why not? And to put that in context too, the Joe Rogan podcast featuring President Trump just broke 47.5 million views.
extraordinary,
So
yeah.
we're seeing a real fracturing. I want to throw in something else here too,
Yeah.
which I think is problematic for media, which is the professionalisation of media, i.e. you go to a university and you learn about how to be in the media as if it's some kind of profession. It's not. It's a trade. It's like butchery. You learn it by doing it. And I think what that has done is, and I say that as someone who has not attended any journalism course, it's probably evident.
Well,
But
hang on, I haven't either. And,
Okay.
And Damien hasn't because he did an accountancy degree, didn't he?
Yes, I have, well, economics, but no. I went to the school of hard knocks and graduated with flying colours.
But I do think there's something in that because, and I don't want to beat the present with the glamorous stick of the past, but when I went into media, it was sort of like this sinkhole that consumed drunks, rogues, losers, outliers, and disagreeable people. And it was fun. Now what you have is a collection of, I would say, anxious middle-class kids who have need to pay off their degrees, that pay off their student loans, who want to fit in. So it's like I'm not going to stand out because if I do, and of course you're also seeing the market size contract. The number of journalists has shrunk completely. So you've got a double anxiety there.
Well, the biggest employer of journalists in New Zealand is the government, and it has been for some time. In fact, during COVID, I think the Ministry of Health had more communications staff than stuff NZ Herald and TVNZ put together. So
So
draw your own conclusions
just
from
on
that.
why do you think it is, I have my own theory, but why do you think it is that the journalistic class do tend to lean left? What is driving that? Because I
They
get the
go to
impression that wasn't true.
university, Damien. They've been to university
And
where
that's
they've been
where they get corrupted.
indoctrinated.
No, I think there's something, they're actually against institutions by disposition. So journalists see themselves as, what the fascinating thing about journalists is that for a collection of independently thinking people, it's curious that they all agree on so much. And the issue is that, so they say, well, I'm the person who asked the questions. I need to be against something. They then believe that to be more liberal is to be against a certain establishment figures or positions in society. So that's how, I think that's how it emerges.
Which is odd, because at the moment they are in the cultural ascendancy and have been for at least a decade.
Which is why you might be seeing, why you see phenomena like the US election result, I would say, and the rise of people like Joe Rogan.
It's also interesting because you think about it, if you wanted to make a mark for yourself in the media, I mean, you look at somebody like Mike Hosking, who has quite a niche for himself. He's a very talented broadcaster in his own right. But the fact that he's on the right gives him a significant point of difference. And then you've got other commenters like Simon Wilson, whose opinions are very much kind of, you can almost predict what he's going to say. Mind you, the same is true of Mike Hosking, I suppose. But it's almost as if at the moment there's more opportunity to make a name for yourself if you were a commentator or columnist on the right.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issue is that we don't have, the breadth of views in this country. Nigel Bigger was talking before about how when the Free Speech Union in the UK wanted to expose some dreadful breach of the principles of free speech, Toby Young, as the chief executive there, would just leak it to the Times and to the Telegraph, and they would, or the Daily Mail, and they would gleefully run the stories. And the pearl clutches from the Guardian and the Sun and the like, the left-leaning rags, would have to sort of cop it. Whereas in this country, there's no even an equivalent of Fox News in this country. There is just no right-leaning media organisation to present alternative views. And of course, it hasn't been helped by that dreadful thing called the Public Interest Journalism Fund, which...
But I wonder if historically, has there been historically a more right-inclined... And what we're talking about here is the spectrum where people can go, and you can do this in the UK, so it's like, if I want to know what the left think about it, I'll read The Guardian. If I want to know what the right think about, I'll read The Times. Has there been that arrangement historically?
Well, we've never had
national
national newspapers in this country, have we? Apart from the Sunday papers, I suppose. I didn't live there at the time, but I'm told that the Dominion, the old style Dominion of the days of Jack Callagher, when it was owned by Murdoch and Mike Robson was running the place, the late Mike Robson was running it when it was independent newspapers. I hear that it was a far more right-leaning publication than what the Post is these days. What was the Dominion became the Dominion Post, and now just the Post, for very woke reasons in itself. I mean, just the mere name change to do away with the title of a newspaper that's got heritage going back into the 19th century, to do away with the name Dominion on the masthead because apparently it smacks of colonialism, just says all you need to know about that bloody publication these days, doesn't it?
So why do we...
And can I just jump in here? Start warming up your questions, because these guys are getting out of control and we need some kind of moderation occurring.
Why? Because there's another really interesting dynamic, I think, in that a lot of the commentators, when you think of commentators, you think of Heather Duplessis Allen, you think of Matthew Hooton and Mike Hosking. They do tend to lean right. I'm struggling to think of a left-wing commentator who has quite the same pulling power as, because Mike Hosking is not a journalist, he's very famous, he said so, but he's a very influential commentator. I'm struggling to think of a commentator on the left So why is that? Why is it?
Who has the standing of Mike Hosking? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, who has the pull and cachet? So you have the journalistic class.
Or could you say someone like
goes
John Campbell?
No, I said somebody credible. So where you've got the journalistic class tend to lean left, and yet the commentators, not universally, but tend to lean right. And I find that an odd.
Yeah, and the other corollary to that, Damien, is that what is the most financially successful media outlet in the country? I would suggest it's News Talk ZB, which is the home of Hosking and Heather Duplessis Allen.
And actually, that's I would say that's where you're more likely to hear opinions and views that would go to the right. I think your mention of John Campbell, somewhat disparagingly, perhaps.
I was just going for the
He
laughs.
was
I'm
going for
sorry.
the laughs, but it's highlighted something that I would submit, that often people are drawn into journalism because they have an emotional desire to help. It's like, I want to improve the lot of group X, Y, and Z, or I want to unmask unmask bad people. So my sense is that often people who occupy left-wing positions do so out of an abundance of what they see as good sentiment. Whereas, and it's interesting when you say, okay, we've got these commentators who tend to be more, say, from 20,000 metres. It's more analysis, which is more of a sort of a rational equation. So I think the two roles may be seen to be quite different, and maybe that explains in some way why journalists do, as a group, incline to left-wing views.
Do you think it might also be the case that people who are passionate and progressive in that manner may be willing to work for lower wages? So there's but that's true, right? If you're pursuing a vocation, and whatever it is, it might be a ministry or it might be a teacher, whatever, it's something important to you.
Yeah.
If you were driven by the money, you wouldn't be a teacher. And there are some fantastic people who are attracted to that. If you believe that journalism is a profession and you are doing God's work, metaphorically speaking, you might be prepared to stick it out. Whereas somebody who's a different worldview, you'll end up going into public relations. And that might also have and given the financial pressure that's on media, is that something that's driving the perceived left-wing bias in journalism? I
think wages have always been fairly crappy in journalism. I mean, before I became a journalist, I drove a taxi for Alert Taxis. I was a nighttime taxi driver. It took me about 7 years working as a journalist to attain the level of income I was earning but this was I was writing out the decline of print magazines, and by the way, when you hear that a platform, because I've been through the decline of several platforms, when you hear that a platform is dying...
There's no causation correlation going on there, is there?
No, I think, but if I show up at a party, it's probably time to go home, just FYI. But what, when you hear, and this is something that we've heard a bit with the collapse of free-to-air broadcast TV, it's, democracy's dying. Democracy isn't dying, it's just going somewhere else. So don't attend to those sorts of arguments. And I will agree with you that people who are motivated by a desire to help, desire to improve things, do accept comparatively lower wages. That's why I work at Maxim Institute, which is a charity, and you can donate if you go to the website www.maxim.org.nz. Peter.
Well, you're talking to the wrong person in terms of
that's right. You were on
wages.
TV when there was lots of dough in TV. My goodness. Peter's buying the drinks, everyone.
So, but I'm the first to admit that I worked at TVNZ during what you might call the golden age, the golden era of it here. I started there in 1979. We were, a company that had no competition for the first 10, 11 years I was there. When the competition did arrive in 1989, 1990 in the form of first TV3 and then Sky, TVNZ was still able to use its massive financial power to be basically a bully in the market. And they looked after their staff very well. And there was always the gnashing of teeth from the print media when they looked at the TVNZ annual report even 20 years ago to see how many people were earning 100,000 a year. It was
Oh my goodness!
yeah.
I actually remember
you
when I
probably
worked
wrote some of that stuff.
when
did
I
you, or
worked
not?
when I
Yeah.
worked at Metro magazine, and Damien's friend John Campbell showed up, and his suit just oozed money, and we sat there and sort of licked our fangs and went, ooh.
Yeah. Now life is obviously not that good, or not as good these days, and I'm the first to admit that I took more than a 50% cut in salary and income when I went from TVNZ to a radio job.
Yeah.
And my income's, now that I'm a pensioner, it's got lower and lower and lower the whole time. But that is just, I guess, the reality of working for media that is not as listened to or consumed as much as TV1 was and is. But having said that, you talk about those prepared to work for low wages as journalists when they, there are people over at TV1 with law degrees, for God's sake, and I've often said to those people, it was a waste of a bloody good education to come and work here, kind of thing.
Maybe that says more about the state of a law degree than anything
Yeah, well,
else.
maybe I don't know, but I just want to say that the people who are looking for an increase in income will do the TV or the radio or the magazine for a bit, and then they'll go to that gold mine for salaries, the public service, and go and work in the comms department of the Ministry of Health. That's where you get the six-figure salaries.
Okay, let's throw it out. I want. Okay, first hand goes up. Questions. Let's.
Okay.
Enough from us.
Hi, my name's Francesca, and I used to work in communications for an NGO, and I think you guys have been far, far too generous on the media. Frankly, the way it is presented is put together by an editorial policy that specifically rules out anything that can be described as hateful or harmful. And there is a deliberate policy, and particularly in TVNZ, to eradicate any commentary. I'm also married to somebody who used to be a left-wing commentator in some of these media, and he's progressively been eased out of them because he's got the wrong views. And that editorial policy is not just set by those young journalists. It's infested right through media institutions. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that?
Can I tell you an anecdote about TVNZ? I think is aware of this perception. So they actually, you're familiar with greenwashing, right? They did some blue washing when they approached Maxim to, and look, we are a conservative, we have a conservative worldview, to do a piece on the charter school legislation. We produced research on it, and they asked someone from the union, the teachers' union, to do a piece on it, and they asked us to do a piece on it. So they are striving for balance. We also did a piece on the rating the first 100 days of the government, and what we did was, because we're familiar with how clickbait works, we rated it an E, and then you read the piece, for expected. But the comments were unbelievable, that, this person from Maxim is nothing more than a left-wing shill, etc., etc. So I think there is a perception issue that TVNZ is aware of, but is also, I wonder sometimes if people have a view that's formed and they don't always read the substance. I'll throw it to you, Damien.
There's this wonderful saying, if you're not sure whether it's a conspiracy or a screw-up, it's probably a screw-up. So I'm not really involved in the management. I used to write for the Herald, and now I write for Stuff. And the limited insight that I have, I think it's simply a case of the management are trying to do the best that they can with the limited resources that they've got available. Their focus on, we need to make money, we need to stick to the bottom line. If they say things that are difficult or controversial, they are worried about their advertisers. They don't want to deal with the broadcasting standards or the media council, and so choosing non-controversial topics or staying away from non-controversial topics is a relatively easy life if you are a manager or an editor at one of these organisations. And also, you don't want to deal with a whole bunch of aggravation from staff either. And so, if you've got somebody who's got an opinion or a column that is going to generate outrage, it's not necessarily going to generate any particular revenue. It is going to cause you a whole pile of work. And so it's easier just to push that out.
But doesn't it generate clicks? Aren't clicks the thing that we want?
It might be over the whole course. So if you say, right, we're going to set a policy and we're going to really go out there and push the envelope, then maybe. But when you're running something like stuff at NZME or Radio New Zealand or whatever, you've already got a huge and size may lead to conservative behaviour. And so I think what is happening is that the managers of these organisations are worried, one, about doing stuff that's going to generate a whole bunch of aggravation without any additional profit, and two, they don't want to get into trouble themselves. So I that might be driving it. Like I said, I'm not involved in management, but from what I've seen, that's some of it. So I don't think it's a conspiracy necessarily. I think it's just people are taking the line of least resistance, which at the moment tends to align with the cultural left.
It's fearfulness in some way.
Yeah, that would be fair.
There's also a tremendous amount of groupthink as well, and the first time I encountered that was in 2019, which was my first year out of TVNZ. And there was, and I forget the name of the campaign, but basically it was a worldwide campaign of media organisations, and all the main media outlets in this country joined in. It was essentially to up the stakes on the climate change debate. The world's going to end unless we do something about it, etc. And there was a whole week of stories where every media organisation in New Zealand was basically upping the climate alarmism and catastrophising what was going to happen unless we did something to, stop our cows farting and our cars belching stuff out, out of the exhaust pipe. And there was no pushback against it. That was a staggering thing. And being the contrarian that I am, I thought, well, bugger this. I was on Magic Talk at the time. I made a point of every morning having an interview with somebody pushing back against that narrative, but nobody else would. And that was the first time that I encountered the groupthink in the New Zealand media. The Stuff, Herald, everybody going in the same direction. And then, of course, it was the following year that just became par for the course. And we think back, maybe it was 2017, 2018, sure, there was the left-leaning, but that particular campaign on climate matters was the first I saw of the groupthink, and then Jacinda comes in, puts that PJIF campaign together for the COVID thing, and then, of course, with the conditions around how you report the treaty and race relations issues, and really it's been one-way traffic ever since, the groupthink, and it's bloody hard to push back against it.
And I think that's it. I think there is groupthink, and the Ministry of Culture did a survey on the media a couple of years back, and I've got 93% of journalists believe the treaty applies to the media. 31 of them believes it's on every single thing, right? So there is that groupthink, but I think that's what's happening. I think we tend to look at that groupthink and perceive it must be some sort of conspiracy at the top. I don't think it is. I think it's entirely organic. And so when you step in there and says, right, I'm going to push back against this, there was nothing necessarily stopping you doing it. There may have been some consequences down the line, but there's not a strong edict. And I think the other good example of that is the gender critical stuff. That the view on trans, there was an enormous reluctance by the media to take a gender critical approach. And because if you did, there was an extremely strong reaction. There possibly still is. But then there was that report in the United Kingdom.
The Cass
report. And that changed, and it gave, and all of a sudden there started to be some cracks in the groupthink, so I don't think it is. I think we need to be mindful. Well, it's my perception of it is it is groupthink, and that makes me hopeful, because you can push back against groupthink. You can challenge. You can look for cracks of light. If it's an ordinance from above, it's a diktat, it's much harder to break. That's my perception.
But when's the groupthink on climate change, for instance, going to change? Because Are we going to wait till 2030 and see that the Maldives are still above water and say, oh, maybe we were wrong, maybe it's not such a catastrophe after all?
I wonder too if there is not, we're talking about within the media, that we as New Zealanders have a cultural desire to rush to consensus. So if you say something disagreeable stop agreeing with me. I'm kidding. But if you say something disagreeable around, say, a dinner table at a dinner party, I don't know if you've observed this, but you will see immediately people rushing to create a faction where we all agree with one another, because we just can't disagree in a reasonable and agreeable manner. Whereas in the United States, they love disagreement. It's ferment. This is how we slice and dice it. Button up. Stop crying on your pinafore. Okay, on that note, I'm going to pass it to Alex. You have a question.
I'm not sure why Pinafore segued to me, but Tim, you made the comment that in relation to media, this isn't dying, it's just going somewhere different. Where's it going? Are there reasons for hope? And related to that, there's been a bit of comment from the front about there are voices on the right, particularly in relation to commentators. My 2 cents is that's a particular type of right, and there's quite a lot of the spectrum that you might call right that isn't represented. Do you think, if you agree, or even if you don't, do you think there's scope for more voices or more representation of other perspectives on the right?
Yeah, I think to your first question, it's abandoning the non-digital legacy platforms that we've been talking about. So I think print's sort of figured out, I think the New Zealand Herald has sort of figured out a business model. I don't know about stuff, and I'd like to, if you have any economic insights, I'd love to. No,
I got nothing.
You
All
got
I
nothing.
have is
That's
my
fine.
charm and good looks.
Yes. Then you are.
Why are you laughing?
Then you are well equipped. Free-to-air broadcast TV, obviously that's very problematic. Radio had been said to be a bit of a cockroach, but New Zealand On Air does a regular sort of annual survey, and that was starting to erode as well. However, there are about 10,000 Japanese imports that are brought into our country each year, and without a band expander, the radios on those cars get 2 stations. One is My FM, which is an urban hip-hop station. The other one is News Talk ZB. So I think ZB is going to be around for a while.
What a marketing coup for ZB and My FM.
I don't think it was intentional. I do not think it was intentional. Yeah. To that, I think you're right about different tones in the conservative view, and I'm not sure where those would be. So the question is, where are the other voices coming from? Where is democracy going? Well, it's going to the internet, and as one of the things that I think is dangerous when we have these discussions, to assume that audiences are just these kind of supine consumers of stuff that pours out. I mean, when they do radio surveys, all they care about is time spent listening, i.e. people change the dial a lot. And what's been heartening to me at Maxim, we've done research on trust, and we looked into the nature of trust in institutions like media, but also around social media. There's a thing called the Edelman Trust Barometer. The previous year, it surveys trust around the world. New Zealanders had one of the highest rates of distrust of social media in the world. So we're sort of like the All Blacks of distrusting social media. My sense is that audiences will go and seek out, and now there's much more available on the internet, that they will seek out the voices that intrigue and entice them. The problem with that then is that the algorithm repeats that, and you descend into echo chambers, and that to me is a big concern.
Well, because the other thing, just going back to that Ministry of Culture survey, it shows that trust in media is going down and consistently going down. And in a way, that is both a good and a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's good in the sense that means that we are looking at the information that's coming in. Only 48% of the population reporting that they believe that the media is fair and balanced. And that's possibly because
their views are affected in the media, the other 52% are suspicious. The fact that so many people are suspicious and wary means that they're maintaining a willing suspension of disbelief. They're not automatically believing that what is there. The thing that worries me, though, is that when the mainstream media loses the trust of the consumers, then where do the consumers go? And they go to random rabbit holes in social media, and that's how you end up with, you know, the crazy people like the Christchurch terrorist. That's where you get some of the really crazy anti-vax people that you know, not people who are anti-mandate, but people who believe that Bill Gates is trying to, you know, get 5Gs into your vein. If the mainstream media was doing a better job of maintaining credibility with its audience, then that would be a great inoculation against some of these more extreme views.
In other words, what you're saying is that if the mainstream media investigated properly some of the claims you've just talked about, if they investigated properly some of the claims of, I don't know, William Happer or Richard Linson, you know, esteemed climate scientists from MIT and the like, if they actually were able to examine their particular views on climate change, do you think the audience would start to trust the media again because they would start seeing two sides of the story?
Yeah, I think they would. There's a really good example. Was it Bjorn Lomborg?
Yeah, that's right.
Came out, and he's not a climate denier. Not that that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but he's a really significant figure in that space. And I mean, I wrote a column on him. I don't think there's much else, but he was somebody who was worthy, and he gave a speech in Parliament in the Great Hall, whatever. And I think there was no members of the media there, and I think that's a shame. And I think that people like him, their views the media should be there. And if a journalist disagrees with what he's saying, then I would like to see him engage with it. It's like when Paddy Gower talked to Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern.
And got caned, I thought.
Okay, but I actually thought that exchange was useful. I think Paddy, and he talks about in his book, that he wasn't particularly well prepared. And if he had been, it would have been more interesting. But I think that exchange was useful. I think that allowed the media to see what Southern and Molyneux had to say. It would have been better if Paddy had been more prepared, and I think he acknowledges that in his recent book, which is a really entertaining read. But you're right. I think if there was, and because we are perceiving the media as only picking one side of the narrative, it does allow people to go down to rabbit holes, and some of those rabbit holes lead to good places, like Reality Check Radio, but sometimes they lead to places where it's a problem.
Can I let's keep things. You have a question, Nathan? Oh, here we go, Nathan. We'll just get a microphone to you so that you can be heard.
Thank you. What's your opinion of how the media acted during COVID? And do you think that discussion of erosion of trust that you're having now is part of the uncritical way that they presented scientific information? And if so, do you think there's anything we can do, like a inquiry into media's role or a self-examination by the media, that might improve trust?
Well, I think in answer to your first question, the media's performance at large during COVID I thought was disgraceful, in that it did not question the government narrative at all. It bought it literally hook, line and sinker. I mean, that extraordinary performance that the Prime Minister was able to have at 1 o'clock every afternoon, it seemed, for weeks and weeks. And there was no pushback against some of the actions that were taken.
That was mirrored by the political classes too.
Yes, sadly, and we saw that at the protest in February of 2022, didn't we? But surely a media that was really doing its job during that time would have asked some questions like, should we really be mandating medical procedures? Is it really right that, you know, people should have to wear masks all the time? Is it really right that supermarkets can stay open but small fruit and veggie shops have to close? I mean, there was just some absurd decisions which everybody could see on this at the time were absurd, but the media wasn't bothering to push back against the government moves. And it's the old story about holding truth to power. There was none of that went on, and therefore it was a major failure.
There were some instances of figures in authority who were very, very strong about it. So, for example, law professor, I think Andrew Geddes, when the passing of the mandate legislation, he called it a constitutional disgrace. So, and this is, there were a number of things. What happened was also, you see, and again, when the guardrails fall off in the halls of power, then they fall off in other places as well. So we're talking about the media, but there's an interrelationship, I think, between all aspects of the public square, and it's connected to wider civil society. And so, yeah, look, there were people who were the desire to pillory and attack people. And I knew people who did not take the vaccine, and they had these. I remember Mike Hosking once asking me on our segment, "Do you know any anti-vaxxers, Tim?" And I said, "Yes, I do. I think they're people of good conscience who have investigated this and made a decision for themselves, because they were the people I knew." And what was fascinating about that was that then Mike and Kate spoke a bit about their own questions about vaccination, and then they recalibrated after the commercial break. It's like, oh no, we've got to stick to. The other part about people in the media is, to that point about people wanting to help, people going there because they want to make things better. There was sort of like, oh, we'll be a good citizen now. This is the media's chance to help. And so they all jumped into line. But in fact, the media helps by questioning.
Yeah, so what would have happened, do you think, Tim, if Bill English had been the Prime Minister in early 2020, which many people would say he should have been anyway, but for Winston, but if it was a national-led government that was in power at the time of the COVID outbreak, and they had started making the rules that the Ardern administration made, do you think the media would have pushed back against them because they were dirty gnats?
Well, have a look at the, and I would submit, I think that there would have been Bill English has a different understanding of where true power is located. He's much more of a localist than a centralist. Say, Jacinda Ardern's government was much more centralising. So but how would the media have responded? Oh, I mean, you can see, I think there's been a clear change in tone from the media, and we're seeing it with the outcries about the results of the American election amongst. This is probably more in the American media. So this goes back to what we've already asserted, which is that they tend to be. Tend to be more on the left of the spectrum.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Next question.
Thanks.
Gentleman with a mic. Sorry. You'll be next. Yes.
So a lot of discussion of the potential sort of bias in the media, but how do you think we're at a free speech conference? You know, how do you think this might play out in terms of free speech? Sure, we're not getting potentially not getting the range of views in our mainstream media, but is that suppressing free speech? Do you think there's been sort of it seems you could argue that there's been pile-ons of people who don't fit with the conventional view, but is the media framework really suppressing free speech?
I go back to the comment I made at the start. No, I don't think it is, and I think free speech also applies to NZME and Stuff. So if NZME and Stuff, so they've kind of got two hats. On the one hand, they're private enterprises, the private firms, and they can pursue their own agenda if they want, and that's what they want to do. I'm also mindful that there is a view that media has a higher calling, that there is something to the fourth estate, and that if you're running a media, there is a journalistic obligation. So maybe there was an obligation to challenge the media, to challenge the state during the lockdowns and so forth. But I'm not sure that free speech is being eroded. It's probably more difficult to get some views out there now than it has been in the past. I suspect that that's probably always been the case. The reality at the moment is that conservative and libertarian voices have a bit of a harder time getting out there, but the opportunities to do so have never been greater now than they have been in the past, because we have the opportunities for organisations like the platform Reality Tech Radio, the spin-off the Daily Blog, and these voices have to, plain sight, brash hide, the opportunities exist. I mean, I will, during the COVID thing, stuff, at least from my perspective, was very good. They published all of my incandescent rants against the mandates and the lockdowns, and it had absolutely no effect. But it would have been useful, I think, if people in those stand-ups had stood up there and says, Prime Minister, I disagree. And the really classic case was when the Prime Minister was going out there and saying, these are the rules that you must follow, and then you compare that with the public health order that Blomfield was issuing, and there was quite a bit of daylight, and the Prime Minister was exercising authority and giving orders that she had no authority to do, and it was only when Borrowdale chased them up and finally found for about 3 weeks the Prime Minister was acting outside of her authority, and the media didn't pick up on that, and that information was there.
I would say that our culture doesn't encourage free speech. And I go back to the rush to consensus reflex that I think that we have as Kiwis. And I don't really know why exactly. I think in a sense, well, perhaps one theory I have is that we're kind of like a large small town. And in a positive sense, I think that civilizes a lot of our public exchanges. But it also, in the sense that you always know someone who knows someone in New Zealand. And that's actually a mitigating factor. I think that's positive. And compare it to the United States, where whole communities of Democrats have never encountered a real-life Republican except through the cartoonish caricatures that are fed to them by organisations that are very highly politicized. We have to sit down with Uncle Mike or Aunt Nairi at Christmas time, and they're gonna have a Chardonnay and a half and start to cut loose, and we've got to deal with it. I think that's a good thing. But I would like us to be able to have some of the conversations that we need to have, particularly around the treaty, in a way that is that we can disagree agreeably. We're not great at that yet, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, I'd like to see, for instance, the coverage that's going to emerge from the Select Committee hearings over the next 6 months on the Treaty Principles Bill. So that is going to be, a really long, drawn-out process. There will be hundreds, if not thousands, of submitters. I'm hoping that Select Committee will be covered on a pretty regular basis. I would like to hear lots and lots of views. I'm sceptical that we will hear it. On the matter of free speech issues, two of the big stories that the Free Speech Union has raised, one concerning young Oliver Joel in New Plymouth, that to my knowledge has not been picked up by any major mainstream outlet. Yet I think it's a very, very important issue. And even the visit of Professor Bigger. Yeah, where's the coverage of his visit? Where's the big feature story about this book that aroused so many hackles in the UK when it was published last year? The moral reckoning about colonialism. I mean, these are important issues. Why not feature stories about them? Why is the mainstream media not reporting on these people? They are significant matters.
Do you think that is an issue of bias, or do you?
Oh,
think
totally.
It's not. So if there was a left-wing equivalent, I think you're right. But I mean, if there was,
I like what you're doing, though. Keep going.
Yeah. No, but I do think that's interesting. As going back to my comment before about Bjorn Lomborg. Yeah. And it's risky, I think, potentially for some of these journalists, but also they're not. It's got to get on their radar. And if you're not interested in conservative worldviews, somebody like Professor, and look, I confess my own ignorance. I was vaguely aware of the controversy, but I didn't know him by name until I saw he was coming out, and then I researched him and I read the book and I interviewed him this morning. But if you're working for Radio New Zealand or whatever, it's just not going to get on your radar.
He will be appearing on radio. Is that right, Nathan?
Yeah, he'll be on RNZ Tuesday night.
Brilliant.
And it
Tuesday
was
night.
RNZ nights did a pre-record.
okay, Tuesday nights. No, it should be on
It
Checkpoint.
should be on Catherine Ryan, and
Yeah.
a 40-minute feature interview between 9 and 12. That's the sort of coverage a man like him
If I
should
can
be
offer a
getting.
behind the curtain look, as someone who goes on tour, we've had 5 tours this year. The one that's been on a mainstream media show happened to be an advocate for homosexual marriage. So he fit the boxes well enough for mainstream media. But yeah, it's pretty crickets elsewhere.
Yeah, and the Oliver Jull story.
No, Sean is pretty much exclusively covering that, and yourself at RCR. RCR's doing a great job of bringing some light there.
Well, when I heard it was New Plymouth Boys High School, I happen to know the headmaster at New Plymouth Boys High School because he was in the same 7th form year 13 and same first 15 as my son at St Patrick's Silverstream in 1996. So he's only 46 years old, and he came to be a headmaster at New Plymouth Boys High School after having been a woodwork teacher. And I thought, I don't think he's too well equipped to deal with this issue, and he has shown himself to be utterly hopeless doing it.
Well, he could become Speaker of the House at one day. If that's
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I think we will wind up because Nathan is nodding. I think there is an AGM that commences at 5 o'clock. Is that right?
There is a formal portion of our AGM, so not as exciting, but please feel welcome to stay. We'll go over our financials. But before we do any more of that, could we just give a hand for our panellists and moderator today?